Aloha, welcome to the Radiate Health and Wellness podcast. I'm your host, Christine D. Ross, and today we're talking about a journey of self-discovery and resilience. My guest, Eddie Francis from New Orleans, has a rich background in broadcasting, communications, marketing, and job recruiting. So, despite his achievements, Eddie often felt just drained by the tasks that seemed manageable to others. It wasn't until he was diagnosed with ADHD as an adult that the pieces of the puzzle finally came together. So, in this episode, Eddie shares his story and the holistic tools he uses to navigate life with ADHD. His insights are not only inspiring, but also a reminder that it's never too late to learn, adapt, and thrive. So, let's dive in. Aloha. Welcome to the Radiate Health and Wellness podcast, where we explore the vibrant world of health and well-being. I'm your host, Christine D. Ross, a board-certified health and wellness coach specializing in behavior change and nutrition, and author of Discover the Adventure of You and Health Beings. Join me as we uncover inspiring stories, practical tips, and transformative insights to assist you on your journey to radiate health and wellness. Well, Eddie, I would like to welcome you onto the Radiate Health and Wellness podcast. I am just excited to have you here today and hear your story of ADHD and not realizing that you had it until you were an adult. So to begin with, let's just tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I am a New Orleanian, born and raised. I left for a little bit, came back home. So I am one of those people who grew up in an environment where we celebrate the human spirit around here. We have a lot of fun in New Orleans. And so that's a big part of it. Grew up in a house with parents, both had master's degrees. They were teachers. So education is very important to me. And so a lot of my career has been focused on actually media. I started my career in radio. So I have a background in broadcasting, but then also communications and marketing, job recruiting is a part of my professional background as well. So I pivoted a lot in my career. And the one thing, Christine, that I have struggled with this so much throughout my career is any time that I would get a big project or something like that, I just couldn't figure out why it would take so much for me to wrap my head around the project. I would have to get hyper focused on things to get small things done, having trouble with deadlines, all of these other things. But what's really kept my career going is that I'm creative. I think I'm likable. I try to be likable. But then I've also taken every job I've taken it very, very seriously. And I have been very dedicated to the work that I've done, whether it's been broadcasting, whether it's been marketing communications, whether it's been job recruiting. I've just really, really embraced all of that stuff. And I've taken the role of being a leader in those spaces really seriously as well, because I like to appreciate people. I like to appreciate the work that people put in. I think, I like to make sure people are treated fairly, that sort of thing. So one of my big guiding principles in life is that I try to promote ethical leadership in everything that I do. And even with all of that, you know, I would get into the weeds with something with work and it would freak me out. I would get freaked out by numbers. I would get freaked out by a big task. I would get freaked out by deadlines. I would procrastinate. And I just couldn't figure out why this was happening throughout my career. And so
Wow.
I think that's a really good place to start with, just getting an understanding for who I am. Because a big part of my saying that I wouldn't figure this out was I try really hard to be introspective, and I try really hard to hold myself accountable, and I make mistakes. But another big part of this has been, I've been one of those people who would make mistakes, and I would get extremely bothered by making mistakes. I got to a point I would hate making mistakes, which made me make more mistakes because I would get so wound up about this stuff. But yeah, I mean, I hope that gives an idea of who I am and what kind of person I am, and how I got to this point in my life where I had to figure out how my brain processes stuff.
Yeah, wow. It sounds like you have really done a lot with your life and just been devoted, educated, had a lot of careers and been successful. So you said starting out you were in New Orleans. Where are you now?
Yeah, I'm right outside of New Orleans. So I grew up in the heart of New Orleans. I grew up in a neighborhood called the Treme neighborhood, which was the first black neighborhood in the country. And so I grew up there, went to college in New Orleans. I started my career in New Orleans and then moved away a few years later, moved away, lived elsewhere, and then I came back home. And so yeah, so I'm in New Orleans.
Wow, well, must be a great place to call home.
It is. It is. I will say, because of the kind of work I had done in the past, especially when it came to broadcasting, a lot of times I would have to work during Mardi Gras. So I was one of those people who had fun, but didn't necessarily have fun during Mardi Gras because I was so busy behind the scenes doing things a lot of times. And that takes a lot during a holiday like Mardi Gras. When I left New Orleans, I was thinking, okay, fine. Get away from New Orleans. I'm not gonna miss Mardi Gras one bit. I missed it terribly when I moved away. And so when I
Okay.
came back home, it was really good to be back. And I was able to participate in Mardi Gras as a citizen. I didn't have to work it anymore. And so yeah, I mean it is a big part of my life.
Wow. Very interesting, fascinating. Just with I don't know, as I'm learning a little bit, doing my homework as far as ADHD and some of the signs that I heard was just anxiety and not really liking being around huge crowds. But it sounds like that was something that you like doing in Mardi Gras.
It depends. I mean, with me, I have the diagnosis I got was inattentive ADHD. And really, with our brains, we tend to be several places at one time at any given time. And that can go one of either ways. It can either create a whole lot of anxiety or it can create a whole lot of excitement. With me, it creates a whole lot of excitement. And so I have always enjoyed being around people. Big crowds don't really bother me that much. And I do think nowadays I'm not around crowds as much. And I really think that's really more of the aging process. I think it's just midlife and just seeing life really differently. But yeah, that was really anxiety though becomes a part of it when it comes to things, very detailed things. So to paint a picture, my father was a singer. He actually sang opera, and my father also was an English teacher. My mother was a math teacher, and my mother could not figure out why I hated math. I hated math. I still hate math. And she was also a chemistry teacher. I hated chemistry. And my mother just could not figure out why it was that I didn't like it. And I couldn't figure it out either. So when I was in high school and, I went to a college prep. And so when I was in high school and I had to take these chemistry tests and I had to take these geometry tests, my mother taught geometry. I couldn't stand geometry. And when I had to take these math tests and these science tests, I would almost freeze up every single time. But I would pull myself together enough to pass the tests. When I got to college, breathed a big sigh of relief. I'm majoring in mass comm. I'm thinking I don't have to do this math and science crap anymore. I get to school and, I'm taking a math class. And again, I'm just kind of freezing up. And I noticed this pattern throughout my career that every time I had to deal with numbers, I would freeze up. And I would really more mentally freeze up than anything. And I would put it off, put it off, put it off, put it off because I just would not get friendly with it. That's where the anxiety would come in. The anxiety would come in having to deal with very detailed things, having to deal with detailed processes, having to manage a lot of details. Like project management is something that I would struggle with because there were so many details in project management. And that's where all that anxiety. So a lot of anxiety kicked in from me in my academic and work life. But then what that caused is that caused me to internalize a lot of things as well. And I learned, and I was really surprised to learn this, that actually is part of ADHD too. That, there's this point where an issue can become very personal for someone. And I think it's because we just have this struggle with trying to figure something out. And then if there is someone who is in the same space with us, who is a very organized person, and they can start being critical, then it becomes really personal. And I've dealt with that a lot. And so my mother was a very detailed person. And so I would get to these points in life when I would just get really, really upset and wonder if she was disappointed in me and all these other things. My dad, my dad he was a creative. So he was just fine with me. He would actually tell my mother, look, it's just who he is. It's just how he's fine. Don't worry about it. And I made peace with all of these things. Unfortunately, my parents are gone, but I made peace with the relationship I had with my mother, realizing that with her, she was really anxious about me a lot of times. There was a lot of anxiety. One thing that did happen, I've never really talked about this publicly, but one thing that did happen to me was when I was born, the umbilical cord got caught on my neck. So they were afraid that they were actually afraid I was going to lose oxygen and possibly pass away, being in childbirth. And so I came to understand that with her, that's where a lot of fear probably came from, that point. So, but yeah, I mean,
I don't
the
know. Let me
angst.
tell you, as a mother, is it just seems to be part of our human nature to have anxiety and worry about the simplest, littlest things. I mean, man,
Yeah,
my
and
adult children now, I'll go without talking to them or checking in, and my mind will just start racing still. And I just get to have my own self talk of being able to let that go. They're
so you
okay.
have to
But
say it's okay, they're
yes.
okay. I can, yeah, and so yeah, I mean, and that was one of the things, and that was the way I put it together for myself. I was just like, well, this thing happened, and later on in life, especially when I started seeing therapists, I started to realize, well, she's my mother. She's gonna worry. That's just the way it is. And so, my dad was like, he's gonna be fine. But but I came to realize that was just part of the package, of having a mother. That's just the.
Right on.
And on top of all of that, Christine, I am a risk taker. I'm a big risk taker. I'm not skydiving or anything. But when it came down to my career, I took a lot of risks, and I just wasn't afraid to try things. And she's sitting there going, don't fail, don't fail. And that was one thing I just kept hearing throughout my life, don't fail, don't fail, don't fail. And so, yeah, so I think there's kind of this soup of things that really kind of contributed to my anxiety. And that's really where I think, that's where I think when I got my diagnosis, things really started to make much more sense to me.
Wow, it makes a lot of sense. But as far as I think it's pretty normal. A lot of us have that instinct to want that approval from our parents. So, especially when they seem to be a little bit more critical, then we just go after it more and more. But
Yeah. Yeah.
how did that apply to being diagnosed with AD?
I internalized that worry that she had, and the criticism. I internalized that criticism a lot. And so throughout my life, anytime somebody did criticize me, even if it was positive feedback, and it was like, okay, Eddie, let me give you some feedback, and I'm going, and I'm going, don't say the wrong thing, and we're gonna have a problem. I think the internalization is really, really where a lot of that stuff started to mix with me, and I started to internalize some of the things that she could be critical of. But here's the other thing I had to learn. The other thing I had to learn is she was a math and science person. And with math and science people, with people who are in STEM, criticism is just how they live. That is how they process life. Everything is to be investigated and proven. And with me, who's much more of a creative person, I'm going, why do I have to prove it? So there was also, I think our personalities also, we just had kind of a push and pull with our personalities. The one thing, so I think a lot of that might have had something to do with it as well. I think that's where the anxiety came in. That's where internalizing things came in. And where it connects with ADHD is this constant, just this constant questioning of yourself, and just constantly questioning Well, why didn't I get it right? Well, what did I miss? I missed something. What did I miss? I had to miss something. Well, somebody just told me that I missed something. What could I have possibly missed? And then the other thing is, this whole idea of emotional regulation, which is really one of the latest conversations, because I'm actually going through cognitive behavior therapy right now. And that was the latest conversation I had with my therapist. And she said, okay, well, we really, really need to talk about how you can regulate your emotions a lot more. And that was something that I told her. I said, now that you bring it up, that has been a big struggle throughout my life. That something would happen, either I make a mistake or someone criticize me, and my brain and my emotions are off to the races, and it turns into a how dare you reaction. It turns into, what did I do wrong? I actually made my therapist laugh when I said this. I said, I can't tell you how many times I've been in the position where something would happen and I'm sitting there going, well, what the F did I do? I would be constantly asking that question. What did I do? And so that is the new thing, that's the new thing for me that we're constantly looking at. So I think that's where that connection between the criticism, the anxiety, and the ADHD all come in, and they get all jumbled up. That the criticism plus the anxiety plus the emotional regulation. I mean, and I think that's where a lot of that stuff would really, really, kind of send me into a tailspin sometimes. Well, sometimes in
Well,
very simple issues, even.
yeah, that's great. You're working with a therapist that does CBT. So that is one of my specialties as well, because I mean, it really does. Everything starts in our brains. Our thoughts are what turns into our actions and our reality, what we manifest in this life. And to be able to go in and control our internal dialogue and what we're thinking, to when we see a trigger, a habit of something that would start that anxiety, to have that internal chatter and feel, that turns into the feelings and the emotions and, well, the results of what happens from that. Yeah, just such an importance to stay in charge of that. And that sounds like that's been a great tool and asset for you to have in conquering ADHD. So is there any other tools that you've used that have really assisted you with just living with it?
Yeah. So I reflected on struggles I've had throughout my career. And one area where I really struggled was my daily to-do list. It was always too long, just way too long. And I would put 20 things, 20 items on a to-do list, expecting I was going to get it done within 8 hours. And so I would put this list down. And of course, at one point in my life, I became a director and I had a staff that I had to supervise. Well, as a director, I was constantly getting pulled away. And so if I had this list of 20 things to do, and of course, a part of ADHD is that difficulty of managing time a lot of times, I wouldn't realize that there was absolutely no way that I could account for the unexpected things that happen throughout my day as a leader. And then I'm not going to be able to tackle 20 items, not unless the 20 items are send so and so an email, right? But it is 20 work items, is 20 leadership items, long term things that had to be dealt with and that sort of thing. So the big win for me lately, especially as someone who is a new business owner, the big win for me lately has been keeping that list of things short. And now my rule is to never have a list beyond 10 items. I try to keep it between 7 and 10 items per day. And that has really helped my anxiety a lot. When I would have that list of 20 items and I could only get through 3 or 4 or 5, it was a bad day for me. And I would get upset. I would get wound up, go home, have a drink, get upset, eat, get upset. It was just this constant circulation of emotions going on and disappointment in myself. And that was, I've really been hard on myself a lot. And I would get disappointed in myself. And again, I would get to this point of, why can't I do these things? Now, one thing that I remember, and I actually wound up telling this story during one of my recent sessions was when I was in college. I actually had a fraternity brother whose girlfriend, who is now his wife, but he said, man, he was like, she is so smart. She's studying for the LSAT and she can sit in a corner with her books, open up the books, and she can study for like 3 to 4 hours straight, get up and take breaks. He's like, but she could just knock it out. It is amazing. Christine, the first thing I heard was, okay, I should be able to do that because I'm a smart person. And so I would try to do that. I would try to one of my hardest classes was communications law. And I thought I should have been able to go to the law library, sit down, spread out these books, and I thought I should be able to sit in the law library and go through these cases and things for 3 to 4 hours. And I couldn't do it. And I couldn't figure out why I couldn't do it. So I would get really, really upset with myself and go, well, why do you have to take another break? You shouldn't have to take another break. The only thing you should have to take a break for is to go to the bathroom or something. But no, sit here and read this stuff. And of course, having ADHD, I would get lost easily when I'm reading. I would just lose track of things. I would lose track of information. And that carried throughout my career, where I would get really upset with myself if I couldn't sit down for long stretches and just do work. And I would get really upset if I couldn't, if when I would lose concentration reading something, I would get really upset. And I just would keep getting upset with myself. And that disappointment just snowballed into a lot of different things happening throughout my life. And so, when I finally figured out that one of the tricks, and I actually realized this when I was reading, when I realized that one of the tricks for me was to break everything up into really, really small chunks, then that was a game changer. And that really, really helped me manage my ADHD, a lot. And that is probably my number one tool for managing it right now. Just simply keeping my list of things to do short. If I do have something, I'm actually reading someone's dissertation right now. So I've had to train myself to read the dissertation like maybe 5 pages at a time. Because because I tried to sit and I tried to read for a long stretch, and I'm going, come on, Eddie, take a rest. And so,
Yeah,
yeah,
baby
so
steps. Baby steps is a huge thing, and creating small goals to be able to have the big
yeah,
picture. So, one of the things that you keep bringing up is just being frustrated and angry with yourself. Is that one of the signs of having ADHD?
yeah, it is. I think for people who are inattentive, it might be because we're not we're not necessarily like the folks who have the hyper version of it, who just folks that have the hyper version. Usually, their issue is they just can't sit still, and they have a hard time focusing because their brain is going from one thing to the next just constantly.
Right. That's what we think of about the kids that are in school and they just can't think of
Yes,
anything and they're just jumping back and forth and just
exactly.
bouncing in their chair. Okay. So, the type that you have, how do you explain that?
It manifests itself in your physical activities. I believe with the hyper variety, but I do think with the inattentive variety, I do think that frustration tends to be a part of it because it's so much more cerebral, and it is so much more. You're sitting there, and your brain still can't focus, but you're just pushing yourself constantly to try to get through something, and you're sitting there like, why can't I get to the second page? I'm reading. I read the first page. No, I read the first paragraph. I need to get to the second paragraph. I really would like to get to this next page. Why can't I get there? Right. And I think that's where a lot of that frustration comes in, just not realizing, why is it you can't just keep going? And on top of that, if there's a big project that you have to do, asking yourself, why do I keep putting this thing off? Procrastination is a big part, is a huge part of what happens with me. And then I read it's pretty normal with people who have ADHD to procrastinate, especially inattentive. And so I have really gotten on myself about that. And for context, I mean, the other thing I have to think about too is I'm 54 years old. I grew up in the 70s. And so in the 70s, there really wasn't much of a language for this. If you procrastinated, you were just lazy, and that's what I heard. I heard some of that throughout throughout school and throughout my career. It's like, Eddie, you're just being lazy right now. Do it. Just go do it like a normal person. I would hear things like that. And that was another thing that caused me to be really hard on myself, because I didn't think of myself as a normal person. I'm sitting there going, well, why can't I just do it like a normal person? And that was a big source of anxiety for me, and a huge source of frustration, because then it got to points where I started asking myself, well, am I just not as smart as I think I am? Maybe I'm just not as smart as I think I am. Maybe I'm much more unintelligent than I thought I was. And I remember I was reading not too long ago. I was actually reading some stuff I wrote in my journal a few years back. And some of the stuff I wrote about myself was brutal. Like, you can't get your stuff together. You're lazy. You wait too long to do things. What's wrong with you? Why can't you be smart like so and so? Not even realizing that everybody's brain just works differently, and I just wasn't one of those people who has the brain to just stick to a very rigid process and that sort of thing. So yeah, a lot of that was a source of frustration and anxiety.
So it sounds like a lot of it just goes back to the negative self-talk that you
Yeah.
had. With reading, you say that you had a hard time just like reading 5 pages. Was it because you had different thoughts dancing around in your head that you weren't able to comprehend? So after reading the 3 paragraphs, to be like, "Well, I don't even know what I just read." So you had to reread it.
You know what it is? So I actually recently, I have a podcast called For Our Edification, and I actually did an episode when I talked about leading with ADHD. And one of the things that I talked about was some of the advantages. And one of the advantages is really weird, is I'm going through this dissertation, and every other sentence or every few sentences I'm going, ooh, that made me think of this, And so what's happening is that my brain keeps firing because things are inspiring me. And I'm sitting there going, okay, now I understand this. I get it. It wasn't that I didn't understand the content. I would get excited and my brain would just go elsewhere. And so I would get frustrated with myself. When now what I do is I have my pen and my paper, or I have my phone or something. And when I think about, I'll either highlight what I just wrote because I got really excited about what I just read, or I'll take a note on it. And then I would think to myself, and this is where it really takes over. So I'm thinking to myself, this is really interesting. I should do a blog on this. Okay, let me start working on my blog outline. No, wait a minute. You know what? I forgot. I put some rice on the stove. Let me go
Yep.
turn that stove off. Because I was only going to read for 20 minutes. And
So you're
I would
quite the
come.
multitasker.
Yeah, it would just wind up bouncing from one thing to the other. But that's actually not a bad thing, because what it means is that your brain is just processing things really quickly, and is really, my brain is just firing off these new thoughts all the time. And the other thing is that my brain is just looking for something to do a lot of times. And so I've had to really embrace that and try to figure out how to flow with it like a river. So what I've done is, in reading that passage, I know I have this great thought. Write the note on a thought, highlight the thought, and then write a note to myself or something saying, okay, come back to this about the blog idea, and then I would write the blog idea down. And of course, a part of that also would be, if I put something on the stove, make sure I read in the kitchen so that I can watch it, And
Yes.
then the other tool is the timer, using the timer on my phone. And so so I've figured out how to make a lot of that stuff work together. But I think another part of this, Christine, is the self-forgiveness. And that was probably the concept that I struggled with the most, because when that idea of forgiving myself was introduced, I'm sitting there going, well, what am I forgiving myself for? I messed up. And that's exactly what I should have been forgiving myself for, because a mistake is something that I don't mean to make a mistake, right? It's a mistake. But being able to move on from that mistake, that's where the self-forgiveness I learned really came in, because one of the things about the emotional regulation was I would just live on that mistake. I would make a mistake and it would bother me for the next hour, the next 2 hours, the next 3 hours, the next 24 hours. And so being able to read through something, I get to something, my brain starts wandering. And instead of saying, oh, you idiot, why don't you keep reading? It would go, oh, okay, wait a minute. Okay, here's that thing. let me go ahead, let me make a note of it, let me put a pin in it, let me write it down. It's okay, Eddie, that your brain wandered for a second. Take a breath, or this is your signal to get up and go take a break. And that's
Yes.
another tool. Breaks. I wouldn't take breaks. There was one job where I would be at work for 12 hours and I probably would take 4 breaks, including lunch. I wouldn't give myself breaks. And so again, I just had this thought that I should have been able to sit down, because to me, this is what smart people can do. Sit down and do this thing for however many hours it takes without breaking any kind of concentration. That's the way I thought my brain should work. So being able to forgive myself for those moments that my brain wanders in another direction and I do start to lose a little track, instead of being hard on myself and saying, "Oh, you idiot, get back to what you're doing," saying, "Oh, okay, it's okay. It's okay. Let's do this part. Deep breath. As a matter of fact, go get some yogurt from the refrigerator and go sit out on a patio and eat your yogurt." And then that sort of thing would help me fire back up and get back into what I'm doing.
Just break, fresh air, some nourishment.
Yes.
Yes.
Play with
So,
the dog. That was one of the recent conversations I had with my therapist, because she was asking me, "How are you taking breaks?" And and I told her, "Well, when I take a break, I'll maybe look at something, and I know social media isn't probably the best brain break, so here's what I do." And I really thought I had her on this. So here's what I would do. I would read a little bit of an article, and she's like, "Well, what you're doing is you're exchanging one cerebral thing for another cerebral thing." She said, "Mix it up." And I'm going, "What do you mean?" And she goes, "Take a walk. When you're doing something cerebral, do something physical. Take a walk, stretch." And I said, "You know what?" I said, "This is why playing with the dog helps me so much." And she was like, "Yes."
yes, dogs are such therapy. It's like I
They
can just
are.
be, well, just like having Bodhi here, kind of see part of him there. He's
Bodhi is
always
knocked
in
out.
my office here with me, but he
Hmm.
lets me know, "Hey, mom, you've been at it too long." And he'll come start just like bumping my elbow. He's like, come on, time for
Yes.
you to get up. So he's a
Yes.
great timer.
Yes.
So,
So my dog Allegra, she does the same thing. And she's a Rottweiler. So she is very social, and she will come to let me or my wife, she will let us know, "Hey, I want some attention and you've been sitting here way too long." And so that was a really great piece of advice. It made so much sense when I thought about it. Because a lot of work that I do a lot of writing in my work. And so I do have to get up from the desk a lot. And that has really been helpful for me. If I'm writing something, if I'm reading something, if I'm proofreading something, if I'm working on a resume or something like that, or if I'm working on a plan or a strategy for something, what that would mean is to get up, go for a walk, get up, get on the patio, and like you said, enjoy some fresh air, go play with the dog, stretch, do something physical to get my brain firing again. And likewise, she said, "Hey, if you were doing something physical all the time, I would ask you to sit down and read something for a few minutes." And so when she explained to me that you exchange one thing for another, I was like, okay, that's why you're the therapist. Cool.
so do you have that issue with the opposite? When, like I say, like when I start doing yard work, and sometimes I have to tell myself, "I'm going to do this for 2 hours. That's it. Then I have to stop." Because otherwise, like I'll start at 8 in the morning, and at 3 o'clock, I'll be like, "I need to eat something. I need to stop doing this." So besides sitting at your desk all the time, do you do the same thing when you have an activity that you're really into and you want to get accomplished?
For the most part, I do think that because my brain is so active and is always in one place or the other place at any given time, I do think when I do physical stuff that I can sustain that a little longer, because my brain just keeps going with it. And there's just something new. So you're right. Yard work is a really good example. I'll cut grass, and then I'll realize I might have to trim the hedges or something like that, and that stuff actually works for me, because and I can do that stuff for long stretches of time. It does help though when I take when I take small breaks. But part of
Yes.
it though is that once I get into it, Then there's this part of ADHD when you get hyper focused on something you love doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I actually like doing yard work. So I will get hyper focused on the stuff I'm doing with yard work, and I can do it for a long time. And sometimes my wife is like, I was wondering if you were ever going to come inside. So yeah, I can sustain physical work a little bit longer. And I think it's because my brain is much more engaged because it's something is always changing. And so I always have
Right.
this different thing to look at, this different thing to do, and then that does sustain a little longer for me.
So I have kind of a silly question for you. You say that your mind, your brain is just constantly going. So a little while ago, me and my daughter were talking. Her boyfriend was there, my husband, and they had had a conversation of they'll just be driving in a car and she'll be like, "You're being quiet. What are you thinking about?" And he'll just be like, "Nothing." But same thing with my husband. So me and my daughter, we were having this conversation of with the guys, like, can you really just think about nothing? It's like, well, I guess you guys are master meditators already because I go and try to meditate and my mind's just going on with things. So we came to the realization that men are not, they can't do multiple tasks at one time, except for this. They can think about nothing and meditate at the same time and do nothing. But can you do that? Can you actually think about nothing?
That's hard for me. That is so hard for me because that's the thing about having a creative brain, though. I mean, I'm always something is always making me think of something, even when. So meditation is actually really hard for me. It's very difficult. I actually really like yoga, but yoga can be really difficult for me because it is so slow. And so when if I'm not thinking of anything, that means I'm really tired, really tired. But it's hard for me to just not think of anything. It's hard for my brain to be at such rest that nothing is going through it. And yeah, that's hard. And I'm sure you can tell I'm kind of a high energy person. So it is really hard for me to just not. No, I've tried. I can't tell you how many times. I can't tell you how many times I would be either, you know, I would either be doing yoga and I'm sitting there like, okay, I'm really sick of this pose, and it's only been a few seconds.
I
So
hear
I'm
you.
I'm
Yeah.
sick of the pose. Or somebody will say, okay, Eddie, slow down, take some deep breaths and meditate. And then I'm sitting there thinking about all kinds of things when I'm not supposed to be. This is I used to kind of laugh at myself. I was raised Catholic, and so Catholic mass can be really solemn and slow and meditative, and I would be sitting there in the pew praying, and I'm going, "Am I supposed to be thinking about this? I'm supposed to be praying right now."
Well,
Yeah,
I
it
think a
was.
lot of people can relate to that, as well as when
Yeah,
you ask yourself, like, I'm not normal.
yeah.
Seems like most of the people feel that way, that nobody feels normal. And really, what is normal? We're all unique.
I
So
mean,
that's
I have had people, I've had conversations lately with folks about neurodivergency, and I actually interviewed. There's another podcast that I do called "I Want to Work There." It is a podcast about the work life in higher education, and I interviewed someone who discovered she was autistic in her 40s. She discovered in her 40s that she was autistic. And it was so funny when at some point, she she used the term neurotypical. And I was just like, yeah, but what is neurotypical? I mean, it's at this point, I'm really wondering what neurotypical looks like. That's because I know so many people who have ADHD. I know a few people who are bipolar. I know a few people who are autistic, right? And so at this point, what exactly is neurotypical? I really do wonder what that looks like. So yeah, I'm kind of on board with that. I don't know. I think we're all kind of all over the place. Um, yeah, I need to hear from a neurotypical person who's been diagnosed as Maybe we need to diagnose the neurotypical people.
everything needs a diagnosis now, doesn't it? It's like, can't we just
Yeah.
be us? So, speaking of getting diagnosed, what message would you have for somebody out there that's seen some of the signs? What is something that they can look for and how can they find support, help themselves? What message do you have for somebody out there?
Well, one sign would be the inability to focus on tasks, even for a short time, but especially if you're trying to do something for a long time and you just cannot. You just can't, you don't feel like you can sit still, or you feel as if you can't focus. Procrastination is a big indicator. And when I say procrastination, I'm talking about you look at something you're supposed to do, a task or a project, and you look at all those little parts of it and you're like, I can't. It looks like a big mountain to you, deadlines, really having a hard time with deadlines, I think is another one. I do another thing that made me realize, when my therapist suggested to me that I may have ADHD, and I went back and I read about it, those were some of the telltale signs that I've been seeing throughout my life. I do think, again, just that inability to stick with one thing for a long time. I actually saw a social media a post about this guy. It was really cool, but there was this guy who was talking about his wife having ADHD, and it sounds like she has the hyperactivity variety. And he said that he will sit there and watch her go from one thing to the next. So he said she would be cooking, and then as she's cooking, she will step away to go do something. And then she'll think about something else and then go do something else, whatever that next thing is. And then as she's going on the way to go, or she's on the way to do something else, she'll see something and she'll say, oh, wait a minute, I forgot to sweep. And then she'll go sweep. And then as she's sweeping, she finishes up maybe. And then she'll say, oh, you know what? I forgot the such and such I forgot the such and such in the yard. And then she'll make it back to the stove and the stuff is almost burned. And he said, what I'll do is I'll watch the stove the entire time and just let her do her thing, because the priority is the stove to make sure stuff doesn't burn. And then when she gets back, he'll just say, hey, I took care of it. It's okay. And I thought it was really cool that he was this guy who was telling his wife it's okay. And you just don't see that a lot with a lot of people. A lot of people they don't have a lot of patience for one another. A friend of mine was telling me that his husband just got diagnosed with ADHD and they almost broke up because he was like, I don't know what's wrong with him. And when they figured it out, then boom, they were able to he said it really painted a vivid picture of who he is and why he is. And now we're fine because all I needed was a rationale. And so I think looking for those signs of people who are, looking for those signs of just being all over the place, and I almost forgot forgetfulness. So I think forgetfulness is a really big one too. Just constantly forgetting. Okay, Christine, I got to tell you the best story of my ADHD test. So I'm going through the test, and my therapist goes, "Do you have problems forgetting things?" And I was like, "No, I don't think I'm all that forgetful." And then after we took the test, I said, I lied. And she said, what do you mean? I said, I forgot how forgetful I can be. But yeah, I think those are some of the telltale signs. I think really having problems, managing big tasks, detailed tasks, and just not wanting to do them. So you procrastinate. The issues with, having a hard time meeting deadlines, kind of being all over the place. Your brain just bounces from one thing to the next constantly. The forgetfulness is another one. And I was really surprised to find out that emotional regulation is an issue for people with ADHD. And that was one I didn't see that one coming. And so that's another thing. Like if you really get not offended easily, but if you tend to internalize things really easily, that could be part of it, and that stress could be. So yeah, so those are some things to think about.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm just hearing you bring up these different things. And I mean, I can only speak as being a woman. That's all I've experienced. But with the different emotions and how hormones affect that. And I mean, having kids, I mean, then they say with, as menopause happens and stuff, that the mind starts to go, that there's seems like all of these characteristics of ADHD, women can pretty much say, oh, well, it's the hormones at play, whether it's your monthly cycle, having kids, menopause, or something. They all seem to be kind of the same. It's just the scattermindness, monkey brain that just doesn't know how to focus sometimes, and the losing keys. And I'm always losing my phone. It's great having Alexa or Google that I can ask find my phone for me and it'll ring. That's been a great tool to be able to just kind of put the line in it and say, okay, this is all normal characteristics for me for being a woman, to this might be ADHD. You talk about a test. What is that test, and how can someone find that to be able to talk to a doctor and get diagnosed and start treating it properly?
Yeah, the actual test name escapes me right now, but the way I even got to it was through my therapist. And so, it is a formal, it is a formal test that the therapist walks with you through. It is not necessarily something you take on your own. And that was going through that was really helpful. And I thought the thing about the test that was really, really helpful was to really figure out how prevalent it is as far as the amount of time has been in my life. So, do I have adult ADHD, or have I always had it? The conclusion that we came to was that, ADHD was something that's always existed, with me. And so, after I told my brother and sister about my diagnosis, and and my sister goes, yeah, you always did have a hard time sitting still. And I was like, thanks, but yeah, is that is the one thing. And I'm going to see if I can find the name of the test really quickly. But
Okay, yeah,
that,
if you find it, I can include it in the show notes. But otherwise, really just reach out to your doctor. Tell them that, hey, I'm showing these
yep.
signs, and just talk to them about it and maybe
Yes,
start
it is
there.
the oh, here we go. Diagnostic interview for ADHD in adults. DIVA. Diagnostic
Okay.
interview for ADHD in adults is what it's called. And so, yeah, that is the test that my therapist walked me through. But I really go back to, I think for me, the telltale sign for me really was related more to my work life. And this is where I became very concerned. And it was a story that I told my therapist that made her say, hey, we need to look into this. But it was the story that I told with her about that I just got really, really frustrated when I was working on an assignment, and I just couldn't keep track of things, and how I struggled a lot with procrastination, because there was just stuff I looked at. I was like, I don't want to do this right now. I don't want to deal with all these details right now. I just don't want to do it. And
You were
then,
procrastinating that.
yeah, then the trouble missing deadlines. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
You weren't wanting to look at all of that because you wanted to procrastinate thinking about procrastinating.
Yeah, no. But I've always hated procrastinating. That's where it gets weird. It's like I hate procrastinating, but I'm gonna procrastinate because I don't want to deal with this crap. And so, yeah, I mean, dealing with those different pieces, those were the things that really made me say to myself, okay, that was when I was telling the story to my therapist. She did ask me, how did you manage this project that you were really struggling with? And I said, I had to close the door to my office, and I had to basically turn off music. I had to, everything. And then it had to be quiet, and I had to take everything line by line by line. And she asked me, well, how long have you had to do that? And I say, actually, it's been like that pretty much throughout my life. And she asked me, well, would you be open to the possibility that you may have ADHD? And I was like, yeah, I'd be real open to that
Yeah.
because I need a language for what's happening with my brain. I need the language for it, and I need to understand it so that I can figure out, how to deal with it. And so I'm really glad that I was very open to it, because my wife was teasing me one day, and she said, ever since you received your diagnosis, you've been a lot happier. And I say, yeah. I said, because now I understand what my brain is doing. It was really, it sucked to not understand why I would procrastinate, why I couldn't handle a big project, why I would forget things constantly. Why is it that I had trouble meeting deadlines? It sucked to really, really go through that and not understand why. So there you have it.
Well, it sounds like you've been able to find a lot of really good holistic tools, from setting timers to working with a therapy, CBT, being conscious of your internal thoughts and thinking, to taking breaks. What are your feelings and thoughts on medicine?
I hate medication. So when my therapist brought that up, she said, "Are you open to medication?" And I said, "No, I don't want to be medicated." I said, "I would like to figure out what the alternatives are." And she said, "Well, changing diet would help." And I was like, "Great, sign me up." So I did. One of the things I did do, especially with this being the topic of your podcast, I did start to monitor my diet more. So I started to do more fruits and vegetables. One thing I did have to control, I had to control my drinking. So that was something that I started to work on. Then, excuse me, I started to relax on how much coffee I was drinking. I was drinking coffee every single day, and I was drinking like 10 to 12 ounces a day. And so I started to relax on that, started drinking decaf in smaller amounts. Started to really, this is really difficult in New Orleans, but, I started to really watch the fats, try to watch the fats in my diet, that sort of thing, and started to really increase the fruits and the vegetables, especially the dark green vegetables and berries and grapes and that sort of thing. Started to really focus a little bit more on berries and, get antioxidants going more. And it helped a lot. And of course, drinking more water, that was a big help too. So I had to find those different things to help me focus. I did find that physical activity helps me focus a lot. So going for walks has been really helpful. Getting in the garage and working out in my little workout area in the garage, that has been helpful as well, as far as, managing my ADHD. So a lot of it comes into play, but I mean, we really, really do underestimate how food can be medicine and also how food can be destructive. And we really, really underestimate that sort of thing. But Christine, I have to tell you, when she brought up medication, I was against it, completely against it. I did not want to be medicated. Yeah, I said, no, I can't. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. So yeah.
Wow. Well, I love hearing that you brought up food and exercise. And really, it's like, man, we could have just started out this podcast with that, do a whole other one on just food as medicine for ADHD. Because, yes, it is such a powerful tool to, I mean, that's a fuel for our body. What really
Yeah.
makes us tick, what functions our brains. And so, yeah, I'm happy you brought that up.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah. There are
any,
times when my wife and I will go and we'll indulge a little bit. So we'll get whatever fried goodness we can get in New Orleans. Because New Orleans, we fry everything. Everything is fried, and and we'll just look at each other and say, okay, it is really time for a nice big fat salad. We really have to do some veggies, and a big part of it, recently I cook a lot. I probably do most of the cooking in the house, but I really enjoy cooking. Recently, I did a gumbo. Normally in New Orleans, for a lot of folks in Louisiana, we will do a roux for gumbo, which is a flour. Do you know what a roux is? So
yeah,
it's the
yeah.
flour mixture of the gravy base. And I actually learned to make a gumbo without a roux, and I'm very proud of myself. So I really, because I love okra. And so, we really went in and did this nice okra gumbo, and, a roux-less okra gumbo. And so we actually we had it, and we were like, this is way better. Like, this is way, way, way better, because we can taste the vegetable, and so that was something that we were pretty excited about too.
Yes, that's the biggest difference that I really experienced with taking out all the fats and just all the food out there that really shouldn't even be labeled as food, is when you start eating just the whole foods and
Yeah.
plants and more spices, everything just has so much more flavor. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
great.
it does. I really, I'm working on it. I'm trying to kick more of the fried stuff out of my diet. That can be, like I said, that can be so hard in New Orleans. But yeah, I'm working on it. I'm really, really working on it. But just the small differences that we have made, it's made a big difference, honestly, for both of us. And so
Well,
we
like you
are.
said before, the baby steps, the small steps.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I still love a nice big fat fried shrimp po' boy. I can't give that up. That's a hard one.
Well, and once in a great while. I mean, do you feel like there's going to be any harm in that once in a great while?
You know what? I'll tell you what. I don't do what I used to do. Now, I used to sit down and crush a 12-inch po' boy by myself. I can't even begin to do that now. There's no way. So yeah, big old pile of mountain of French fries. Oh goodness, it was heaven back then. But now I'm sitting there going, oh goodness, that is a lot.
Fried foods are addictive foods. So
They are, yeah.
you've had to work with that too. So, Eddie, what does it mean to you to radiate health and wellness?
I love this question. I think what it means to radiate health and wellness is to number one, figure out what's going to help you be your best self. And I think for me, for example, what helps me to be my best self is to take care of myself, whatever that looks like, but also to laugh. I love to laugh. I love being happy. So that I think, and that's when I feel like I'm at my best. I'm at my best when I'm laughing. I'm at my best when I have jokes, but then also when I really, really want the best for other people, I feel I'm also at my best. For a lot of people, obviously that looks different, but I think whatever it takes for you to be your best self, I think that's what it means to radiate health and wellness, because we can all see somebody when they're at their best. And I think when a lot of us, even when it's really not necessarily something we are prioritizing, in the backs of our heads, when we can see someone being their best self, then it really does help us, I think, a lot of times want to be our best selves. And I just think, having that aura of positivity around yourself, I think that's what it means to radiate health and wellness. And I just really wish we could have much more of that, in a world of people choosing to be the very best they could be, so that other people could feel better about themselves as well. So I was on the air
Absolutely.
today during a radio show, and there was a listener who called in, and she had the most infectious laugh. And I said, okay, she sounds like the type of person who starts laughing fits. And I said, I actually kind of want to have a laughing fit on the air right now. I just wanted to have a big laughing fit, however long it took. But that's not really good radio. But that's what I wanted to do. you know. And it was one of those, I said, because I feel good when I laugh a lot. I feel really, really good. And I like being happy. And so yeah, and I was just like, she must be the most wonderful person to be around because she has this infectious laugh. And so to me, that's what it means to radiate health and wellness.
Beautiful. I love it. So, your laughing session, that brings up just, there is something called laughing yoga. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
Exactly. That's how it starts. Somebody just starts laughing and you just keep on going and feeding off each other's laughs. So it does wonders for some people. For me, however, it doesn't work because I feel like the laugh is a little bit artificial. And so it's a little bit harder for me to get there. And that's probably just something I get to work through. Yeah. So laughter. Yes.
You have to have that very natural, what is it called? The Duchenne smile. You have to have that natural Duchenne smile, the one that comes just really naturally. So I have a best friend who is funny. He's OCD. He is hilarious. And years ago, I'll never forget this. Years and years ago, he laughs a lot. I remember walking into his house and he was laughing about something. And I said, what? And he just kept laughing. And we both had a laughing fit that lasted about, I kid you not, about 15 minutes. And what happened is that the young lady he was dating at the time, she walked in and she goes, what are you two laughing about? And then she started laughing. And then her brother walks in. He goes, what's going on? And so the four of us wound up laughing. It was just, we had a four-way laughing fit that went on for like a good 15 minutes. It was probably one of the best nights I've ever had. But
That is the best therapy you can have right there. Just laughing about nothing with friends.
it
So,
is.
what
Yeah,
a way to
I was like,
radiate
this.
health.
I was like, yeah, this is really cool. I love this. Yeah. And we haven't done it since. I don't know. I'll have to ask him what his problem is. But yeah. I tell you, that came from a very real place that night. It was, I don't know. I mean, I just saw him laughing and I was like, what? And I was just off to the races. And then we got these other two people involved. And I'll never forget her brother's face because he said, I don't know what y'all laughing about, but keep going. So, yeah, I'm going to have to look up laughing yoga. I love the sound of it.
Lord Eddie, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a great, delightful conversation, a lot of fun, a lot of laughs. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. I appreciate it.
Mahalo for joining us on this episode of the Radiate Health and Wellness podcast. I hope Eddie's story and the tools he shared for living with ADHD left you feeling inspired and empowered. And if you'd like to learn more about Eddie, his podcast, and the amazing work he does, visit his website at eddiefrancis.com. And if you're struggling with self-talk or facing barriers in your life, I'd be honored to be your coach. Together, we can walk a path toward clarity, confidence, and transformation. So you can schedule a free consultation with me at radiatehealthandwellness.com. And I'd also love to hear from you. If you have any questions, would like to share your story, or just want to connect, reach out through my website or email me at radiate.hw@gmail.com. Find me on Facebook and Instagram, or you can simply leave a comment below. Also, don't forget to check out my books, Discover the Adventure of You and Health Beams, available to assist you on your journey to lasting health and vitality. Lastly, if you enjoyed this conversation or know someone who could benefit from what we discussed today, please share this episode with them. You never know how your sharing can ripple health and wellness out into the world. And remember to like, follow, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thank you for listening. And until next time, take care of yourself and keep radiating health and wellness in all that you do.